Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. This is coming to you late Thursday night because I'm still all fired up from a project I've been working on and just felt like doing this too. Hopefully that project will come to the public soon. It involves a new way of doing video captures. A ton of awesome people helped, so I'm very excited and I can't wait to get it out to everybody. I'm just missing one last piece of hardware, and then the main part of the video is done. I could just slap that all together, put it out for all of you awesome people, and hopefully this all means that we can get much better video captures from our consoles that can be scaled to whatever resolution we want. So fingers crossed. But anyway, let's jump into the Q&As. First up, Adam W. asked, are there any options for reading the ROM from an original Genesis cartridge via a USB drive other than the Retrode or Retrode 2? Yes, and it's open source, and it's designed by Renee. It's the Universal Mega Dumper. This is a project that I don't know if anybody's selling them pre-made. I hope they are at this point, but it's open source, and there's different cartridge adapters that you can get. I believe it's Genesis and Super Nintendo now, but he has the pinouts, and it's really configured so that anybody could make any cartridge adapter. And I believe there's even a GUI in the works for it too. I was bothering him about that because I grew up on DOS, and I don't want to have to type in DOS commands anymore. I've earned my way past DOS commands. So yeah, hopefully this is something that you could purchase. I know that he's not selling them, but it's possible that somebody else might. But you have the schematics here if you want to build your own, and if you build a couple, I guarantee a few people would buy them off you. So other than that, you could use something like a hacked Retron 5, which are hard to get anymore, and that console is totally useless anyway. I think Retro Freak might be able to do it, the one that's kind of like the Retron 5 clone but smaller. But there's a few like that, but I'm a fan of the Universal Mega Dumper because it's designed specifically for that, and it's open source, so if anybody needs to improve it or make any changes, just go right ahead and add to the project. So I'll leave the link for that in the description. Next, Marcus said he's impatiently waiting for that Mega Drive 1 mod. Not as impatiently waiting as I am. I had a lot of people working on that and then all grinded to a halt to test this last thing. And supposedly the fix or potential fix is arriving to me next week. And although I'm a little bit too swamped to make the full video on it, I will absolutely take some time, slap it together, do some quick tests, and even if it ends up just like a tweet with an addendum on a website page or something, I will let everybody know what the fix is if this works. I just want to test, I have such a very distinctive way of testing these things where, this probably sounds untrustworthy, but unless only a few people say that they can't find any interference, I need to test it myself, because like my old boss used to say, if you want something broken, give it to Bob. So hopefully it'll get my final stamp of approval, but I trust everybody that's been working on this, and I really hope it's going to be done soon. Ghetto Bill Gates was asking, does anybody know how many frames of lag the Arcade 1-Up screens have? Ray Command tested it, and I don't think he did any solid lag tests, but he certainly said, it's nothing terrible. It's certainly not as bad as like those Scart to HDMI converters or like the Retron 5 with some of the cores or something. But I do plan on getting a Mortal Kombat one, because even if it sucks, MK is my favorite game of all time, and I have a friend that would let me leave this in, her basement or something, just as a toy to eventually mess with. So if I can get one really cheap, maybe Arcade 1-Up would actually allow me to either borrow one or buy one at a review discount or something. But I'll definitely test that because I really want to see for myself both how many frames of lag total versus the original and how many frames of lag just on the flat screen. Because if the emulation side's garbage, but everything else is okay, why not throw a Raspberry Pi in or something? So yeah, I'll find out. But I don't think the MK board, or the MK kit, comes out for another month or so. So I would imagine probably 2 months before I'm able to get one. Oh, and Ghetto Bill Gates also asked, how does one get in line to buy a satiator? I really don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. I say satiator. The creator himself said he didn't really have a name in mind. He just spelled it like that. But anyway, right now, people who have been supporting him on Patreon can get in line. There's no official line, but they'll get first dibs on them. And then after that, I think he's just going to open up orders. So there's no way to get in line now. If you're a Patreon, or if you have been a Patreon supporter of his, you get first dibs. But I talk to him now a little more regular than I did. You know, I used to go months without corresponding, and now every few weeks I've touched base. So hopefully I'll be able to get a little bit of a heads up just to prepare everybody and let everybody know when it's going up for sale. And I am dying to get one myself. Tony Maura asked if I've been following that Nest Maker program. No, because I'm not a software developer. I would have to relearn all of those skills from scratch, and I really love the hardware side of things. I mean, it's just always been my main interest. So, while I think that's great, and I can't wait to see what other people do with it, it's not something that I would use. But if you think that I've missed any important updates, feel free to reach out, and I'll happily post them. Doug Coolidge had a good question. He said he recently got a Sega CDX and wants to know what he first does to it. So I'm not an expert on the CDX. I've had two, and I haven't, out of all the Genesis consoles I've owned, I think I spent the least time with that. My second one's at Voltar's now, being torn apart in a million pieces. But Jose Cruz recommended that as long as you're comfortable taking that apart, because there's a lot in a little tight space. But I believe, and I might be getting this wrong, but I believe where the CD-ROM assembly sits on the board, that could scratch underneath. So take it apart and see, and just look for scratches on the board. And if you see the CD-ROM drive kind of scuffing anything up, just put some black tape over it. This one I would actually use just standard like electrical tape, not even capped on tape or anything. And that should be enough, because it's just the constant wear and tear would slightly scrape that over and over. So that's the first thing I would definitely do. The next thing I would do is the little power board that runs alongside of it. You'll see a wire that connects the power board to the main board. On the CDX that's with Voltar now, that wire had, I guess there was too much insulation stripped, and I guess over the years it had kind of started to corrode away. And at some point, I never took it apart, so I didn't know this. I just I traded somebody for a top loader. The 12 volt line was exposed and hit the 5 volt line and shorted out a lot of stuff on the board. So make sure if that wire is exposed, once again, I mean, feel free to just throw some tape on it. You know, non-conductive tape like the black tape or Kapton or something like that. You know, a lot of people still give people a hard time for using tape and glue and stuff like that, but I couldn't think of a more perfect use for tape. It's just, you know, there's no need to go out and restrip and add a new wire for something like that. Just basic safety. Other than that, I mean, I would wait until somebody, unless you're really comfortable doing a mod for the first time ever, I would wait till somebody else does the triple bypass, because that I think would be a great addition to the CDX, because the audio's not good. And some of the CDXs I've seen, I think, went bad. So that video that I have online that says, here's an example of the best stock Genesis I've seen versus the worst stock Genesis I've seen, that was a CDX that I think went bad. And there was more than one that I had heard like that. So putting the triple bypass in is something that you should definitely think about, both for audio and video. And, you know, I mean, it's a rare and expensive console, so whatever you do to it, do it twice as slow as you would everything else. You know, take a look at the caps, maybe consider doing the cap replacement. If you have the ability to, with an oscilloscope, calibrate the laser. Just, I mean, for something like that, I would buy a Genesis to beat up on, and then buy the Sega CDX for, like, you know, that's your fancy wine. Pinkies up, it's CDX time. So that's pretty much it. I mean, that's, you know, at the end of the day, it's just the Genesis and Sega CD in one, but just address those two problems that are unique to it, the scuffing of the board and the power wire. Schwink asked, how good is the quality of Insurrection Industries Scart cables that are listed on Amazon? Well, first, until you told me, I didn't realize they were listed on Amazon. But that's great, because I know a lot of people have Prime, and I mean, I love Prime. It's just, being in New York, it makes my life so much easier. But I already reviewed them, and I liked them a lot. I used the review both as a way to review their cables and kind of as a refresher for people that either were new to the channel and didn't see the other cable videos, or just needed a refresher course. But I like them. I have not a single complaint about them, and I'll leave a link to the full page here for anybody that's interested. And I mean, overall, I just no problems whatsoever, and they seem like good cables. Certainly infinitely better than the crap that you'd find on eBay or AliExpress or anything like that. Riot Gear asked if he can hook up a PAL Amiga to an NTSC display using the RetroTink 2X. So no, you can't. RetroTink spits out what it gets in. So it will accept PAL, but then it outputs PAL. You can get converters. I believe you can get zero, in the analog realm, zero lag is more common than not. So as long as it's not something that processes the image. So I've seen VCRs that play both, but then they have, I've also seen like VCR DVD combos that add lag when you put it through it. So I would just try to look for any kind of, whatever's the cheapest equipment you could find to do the conversion. And unfortunately too, I know almost nothing about PAL stuff, so this might also be a good question for one of the forums or anything, but at least I could answer the first half of your question. No, the RetroTink won't do any conversions like that. James H. had a question about TTL Sync and Extron crosspoints. So rather than read it through, I think I'll just explain the use case. Extrons require C-Sync. They don't accept Luma or composite video. I don't know that they require TTL going in. I think they'll accept anything as long as it's clean sync, but they always output TTL. So if you're going into the D-sub connector of the OSSC, that's fine. That's designed to take sync levels that high. However, that D-sub connector does not have a low-pass filter, and I found that the OSSC's low-pass filter works a little bit better than the ones in like a THS 7374. Or maybe it's, a combination of things, but whatever it might be, if you have a console with the toggle switch installed in that, using it on the OSSC is better. So it's best to go through the Scart input, and all you would need is that 470 ohm resistor on the sync line before it hits it. So you could even put that in the Scart connector, from like a BNC to Scart cable. You could put that right in the Scart head that goes into the OSSC. That should be fine. If you want to double check out that video about the $100 scope. If you have any doubts about any of this stuff, the way things are costing nowadays, you might save money by buying a $100 scope than risk shorting anything out. So that's always a good thing. The Scart input could take, it's got to be less than a volt. 950 millivolts is about as high as you could go. And I think it's 5 volts on the D-sub. Secondly, in the case of leaving the C-Sync TTL, do I still add the same cap on the consoles that recommend it? Is it needed at all? So yeah, absolutely. It's a filtering cap to prevent. Trying to do this without getting so nerdy, because of after everything Steve's taught me in the past few years, I could probably talk for an hour about it and probably still not get it 100% right. But yeah, I would always leave the leave the cap on. And to be honest, I think I remember Crosspoints taking 75 ohm C-Sync on the input side. So if that's the case, I would just make the cables to spec, so you never have to worry about anything. You can go directly into a monitor and not worry about if it accepts TTL or not. But no matter what, yes, leave the capacitors. That's definitely important. Anapan was talking about Patreon alternatives, which reminds me that I don't think Subscribestar was allowing people to sign up to my account, which is weird because when I logged in, like through in private browser, so I could see it as other people see it, when you're not logged in as me, it looked fine. But it wasn't until yesterday or the day before that people were actually allowed to sign up. So that's a little strange. I didn't realize that, which explains why so many people had asked me to switch to Subscribestar and then I didn't have any subscribers. So oops, my bad. But Bitbacker has been working, and I think I already have 2 on that one. So yeah, anybody, I just appreciate the support. I don't really care where it comes from. Thank you very much, and I'll try my best to make sure it always goes to good use. Pablo Romero had an interesting one. He said that somebody had taken a 480p signal with horizontal scan lines and then connected that to an OSSC and added vertical scan lines to get something that felt like a CRT look. I guess the upscale was to 960p, so the TV then did its own scaling. And that sounds kind of neat. It sounds like it might as well have been just some of the scan lines you'd see on the Game Boy Advance HDMI, excuse me, where they do, it's like squares to make it look like the Game Boy Advance's LCD screen. But because you're scaling from 960p unevenly, it probably stretched it out enough to make it feel like CRT scan lines. And while that's neat, and I'd certainly like to try it, I have a Garo sitting right here, and I have some equipment I could mess with to see if I could make that happen. The thing that you would really need to truly have a CRT experience on a flat screen, and not just lines across the screen, is you would need to draw the vertical lines in the same way that you would see them, and there's contours to them. And now they follow a pattern, so it's not like each pixel would have to be analyzed and redrawn, but it's something that I don't think you could just drop lines on top of. I think it's something like you'd have to use an algorithm that detects where the pixels are, and then draw the lines through there. And that's why something like when I spoke to Kevtris about it, he said that he thinks for something like the Super NT, the Mega NT, and all that, to make it really look like a CRT would take 4K worth of resolution. And he said even then, you might only get to like a high-end consumer TV look. Something like a 1,000-line BVM, you would need almost an 8K scaler for. So it's an interesting option, and it's something I think I would have fun trying out. And who knows, on some TVs it might just stretch it perfectly to look all weird and just like, excuse me, just like a CRT. But yeah, I don't think you're going to get a true look where you could be able to sit side by side and really feel like it's an accurate representation until you have higher resolution scalers that could do it. But that's really cool. So if anybody here has time to do it before me, snap some pics. I'd love to see it. Firebrand X had a good question. He was wondering what my thoughts are on various Dreamcast power supply alternatives like the Dream PSU or the Pico PSU. So I've never had a power supply in my Dreamcast die, so I've never looked into it. And I'll start out by saying if my power supply does die, I'll probably buy one of the two. I'd probably buy the Pico PSU because it's something that's made and used in a lot of different products, and then there's already those custom 3D print shells that you could stick right in the power port and all that. But my thoughts on that is, just like my thoughts on the Nintendo power supply, like I talked about earlier, is I'm always really cautious because I know how much could go wrong in power supply circuits. And the best example I can give on why to worry about things like that is if you're building a video amp and you test it and you use the wrong resistors on the output, nothing's going to hurt. You're not going to damage any equipment. It's fine. It's just going to be too dark, let's say. Maybe you use 750 ohm instead of 75 ohm. You don't get a picture. Okay, so right then and there's a problem. You fix it, you're done. With power supplies, everything could appear to be working perfectly, but you're slowly doing a lot more damage and wear and tear to whatever the product is, and you don't even know it. And there's other weird things that could always happen with power supplies that, you'll run into a scenario where whatever it is, computer, video game console, would only crash in this one scenario as a result, so then you're chasing ghosts for a while. It's rough. And, to be honest, I don't want to keep bringing this up over and over, but that's part of the 3.3 volt flash thing, is like that Neo Geo 161-1, that does a lot of real damage. And I think it's already killed quite a few Neo Geos. So, that's one of those things where you could probably use it for 6 months and everything appears fine, and next thing you know, your MVS is dead. So, it's I would just be careful. This is a really long way of saying I would use it anyway, just to try it myself, but anytime you're doing any kind of power supply replacement, see if the right people have reviewed it. See if the Stees of the world reviewed it, not people that just plug it in and say, yeah, it works, it's great. David Kenyon said he's going to install the triple bypass in a Model 2 Genesis and wants to know if any of the models had a discernible video or audio difference. So keep in mind now, I'm trying to hit every single board revision just to get install points. Jose, Ben from iFix Retro, Leon K, they've all been posting pictures. Been a huge help. I've been saving and compiling it all. But even though we've already, I mean, it's probably 30 units now, but very often we've only had 1 or 2 of each. So it's hard to say definitively, whereas, you know, when I started doing this NES testing, there was already hundreds of people that figured out the 1 chips were better, and it was consistent across each one. So what I'm saying may or may not be true, but I saw on the few that we tried that the VA1 had a little bit less video interference. They all looked awesome. They all sounded awesome, but just the way the board was routed, the VA1 had a little less interference. And keep in mind that it is impossible to have any analog signal without some kind of analog noise on it. Maybe it's not enough to be seen on a 4K TV, you know, scaled 9x. Maybe it is, whatever. But, you know, you're going to see some kind of noise on everything. But I would try, if you're going to do 1, I would just go with the VA1, and I would do Leon's installation, where he does he put the triple bypass on the bottom, and he removed the capacitor so that you don't have sync on the board running to composite video. But because it's on the bottom, and he didn't remove the encoder, so you still have, I don't know if composite video is still going through, but there's still a sync signal going to the composite sync line. So you could still use HD Retrovision cables, or if you had a RGB Scart cable that got sync from composite, those will work too. So I would try it that way and see what you think. I'll try to remember to leave a link to his, but if not, or if I can't find it, just hit me up directly and I'll send you a zip file of the installation that Leon did. And because I have pictures here of it. But I think that might be your best bet for this one. Ludo had a question regarding desoldering guns. He bought the same one that I had that gave me all that world of trouble that a lot of it wasn't even my fault. And he wanted to know if there was anything else. He remembered the ZD915 that I have sitting right here that I love. Sometimes they're in stock, sometimes they're not. But Voltar also mentioned that he might be making a video about a budget desoldering solution. Well, he spent quite a bit of his own money, same as the first time, buying a bunch of these, and so far the ones that he found were garbage. So if your current gun is working, all I would say is clean it really, really well, like obsessively. Like don't just don't just clean it through the front. Take it apart, tap everything out, carefully clean the spot and back. Maybe even throw out the little filter every time you use it if you do something big like a full desoldering of chips or a full cap replacement or something. A tip Voltar gave was buy the Hacko filters, you know, the little tiny ones that go inside. Buy the good Hacko filters and put it in that one, and try to extend the life of it as much as you can. If you're doing some real work and you want something reliable, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the ZD915 from what I could tell. I've probably only had 3 hours worth of use on it, and it already destroys the other gun even when it was brand new. So something tells me that other gun was defective from the day that I bought it. Not to the point where it wouldn't work at all, but I've never had an easy time with it. And, you know, even the experts like Cruz, he came over a few times, and while he got it to work, it certainly wasn't as smooth as when he used his own equipment. So, you know, if you could nurse yours along until there might be a better solution, we don't know, cool. But if not, that ZD915 is awesome. And Darkstar7 chimed in to say that he bought his on Amazon for $60. That makes me jealous. They were $105. If they were $60, I probably would have bought 2 and then just left one at Cousin Scott's. He probably would have never taken it out of the box, but at least I would know I have a backup. Shoot the Core had a really good question, and it involves something that I am also guilty of. So all the guys on the Retro Roundtable and I love busting each other's chops. In fact, if you had read some of our private chat messages, you would think that we were mortal enemies, not good friends. But sometimes that spills out onto Twitter, and the people that know us have some fun with it. But one of the things that always seems to happen is Scart versus component. And of course, Nick is going to pimp his own cables and make fun of Scart just because. You know, he's not serious about it. He's just kind of kidding. But the point that he always makes is, first and foremost, I mean, if you even have the slightest grasp of the engineering that went into those things, you know, I never got around to making that second video on comparing RGB to component converters, but when you see on the scope how perfect the retrovision cables are, you know, they're really well built, they're really well shielded, and there's no compatibility issues. You just, anything that's component video that accepts 240p, you plug it in. So I guess there's a little compatibility issues. But with Scart, you know, tons of build quality issues from just over the years. You could have the best cable manufacturer on the planet that's still a weird, finicky connector that sometimes has issues. You know, the TTL versus 75 ohm, certain console manufacturers, most console manufacturers, requiring components in the cable rather than putting them on the motherboard. There's just so much that goes into making sure your RGB Scart cables are built correctly that's the one thing that I agree with. If you know your equipment can process 240p correctly, it is way easier to just use the HD retrovisions, just because you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. But, I mean, the biggest complaint I have about the HD retrovisions, in all seriousness, is that they're not available for every single console out there. So for somebody to say, okay, that makes sense, I'm going to get a Genesis, I'll get, you know, a Core Graphics or a Super Graphics with a DB graphics booster that's got the Genesis 2 port, so I could use it. You know, you got Saturn and PlayStation covered. Great. What about the Jaguar? What about internal Super Graphics mods? What about every other console out there? So that's where it's the only reason, or the only real problem I have, is you can't have a full console setup with those cables unless you start getting into making creative adapters and all that stuff. But yeah, for people that only have Genesis, Super Nintendo, and Saturn or something, absolutely, or whatever they make the adapters for, they're great. But I stick with Scart just because I need it for every console I have, and a lot of the stuff I do, every little thing will affect it. So the HD retrovision cables have a little bit of filtering in them. 99.9 to the millionth power times, it's a huge help to everybody using it. But when I'm zooming in 1,000 times trying to compare processors and solutions, I can't have anything affecting it. I need as raw a signal as possible. And I've even done things like cut cables and make them a foot long or something. So, you know, use dongle adapters this big just to try to get the signal as perfect as I can for my tests. So I use it because I want RGB for every console that comes through here, and because I can't have any processing at all, or else I can't do true comparisons of stuff. You know, what if the retrovisions fix an issue where, you know, that you wouldn't find on RGB because their processing fixes it? How would I know it's there? So I guess it's a really long way of explaining the whole situation. I probably just said we were all kidding around, but I just felt that people, if you asked the question, you deserved the real answer. And I would just pick whatever works for your solution. I know so many people that have like a Wii, PlayStation 2, Genesis, and Super Nintendo, and that's all they want. They got component everything. It's perfect. They could use it on their TV, on their CRT, and it's the best for them. But I also know a ton of people that that need straight up RGB and get Scart. I even know a lot of people that need custom BNC cables. So they don't even want to go Scart. They do the full, I mean, they're like $55 each, but they're like heavy duty, super high end RGB cables. So get whatever's best for your total solution. And if you plan on getting a second, always let that be the HD retrovisions. I cannot tell you how many times I've been somewhere, you know, my my home setup, my test setup's all RGB, but I just need to, well, in the US at least, I'm not sure where you're located, but, you know, in the US I'll show up to an event or a shop and need to try something, and never, you know, I always have the retrovisions because it's just so much easier to use component in a lot of these scenarios. So I hope that was a good answer. Josh O'Rourke had a good question, a question that has been asked since the release of the Sega CD. He has a Genesis 1 with a Sega CD Model 2 and 32X. He's using a 32X patch cable that pulls stereo from the headphone port and then connects it that way. Awesome. Is there any benefit from pulling the audio from the RCA ports of the Sega CD instead? So, if you're having noise through the headphone jack, give that a try. But other than that, no. And one of the questions that I've gotten since the site was, first public, is, how do you hook up a Sega CD's audio? And even as a kid, I remember reading the instructions, and I have a scanned version of the instruction manual on the website, and it almost felt like Sega made it confusing on purpose. But the truth is, they put the stereo audio jacks on there because they didn't want you to feel like you were just buying a game system add-on. They wanted you to feel like you were buying another addition to your home theater. So, this is the Sega CD with CD quality audio. So they basically, it was an aesthetics thing with the convenience of now you could pull stereo here. And over the years, that actually was quite a convenience for me. But if your scenario sounds good and there's no noise, I would leave it alone. And on the other side of things, if we get, or if you do like the Firebrand X audio amp in your Model 1, I would make sure to only use that output and not go through the Sega CD, because just short of the distance of the cables and all that stuff. One trick too that you could do if you have a desoldering gun and some patience is the thing that I always love to do, where I desolder the RF jack. I take a Model 2 Genesis DIN and solder it upside down in its place, and then you just use, you can get stereo audio through that. So use Firebrand X's board, add the audio to that, and then just pull the video lines right from the CXA chip. And you could essentially just turn the port into a stereo Genesis 2 port. So maybe that was a little too thorough of an answer to your question, but yeah, just if what you're doing now isn't causing any problems, just stick with that. It'll be easiest in the long run. John Harrison wanted to know if I knew of a place to buy both the Mister and the IO board. I don't think you can. I think you need to buy the D10 Nano from Amazon or DigiKey or something. I'll leave a link to the Amazon one. I'll leave a link to my page, which I'm trying to keep updated with all this other stuff. And buy the $6 USB hub to go with it. You might already have one. It's $6. Just do it. Trust me, because you need to get the small USB port to big and all that stuff. And I believe the place I got my 3D printed case from also sells all of that stuff. So I'll leave a link down below to all that and give that a try, but I don't know of any place, and I don't know that you will ever find a place that sells both the DE10 Nano and the IO board and memory stuff. Jesse Oakland said, is it possible to obtain a Neo Geo Pocket SD? Retro HQ doesn't seem to have released any news about a new production run in more than a year. No, and I've spoken to James about this before, because there's people that do this for a living, trusted people like the Stone Age gamers of the world that would work with you to get your designs in and sell them so you don't have to deal with it. And he's busy finishing up the Jag SD, and I think he's looking to branch out to do all that. So I would still just follow that same forum on Atari Age. He's very good about giving relevant updates there, and just go from there. But hopefully we could when things slow down for him a bit, I could have another chat with him and try to introduce him to some more people, because it would be really great. Like, I tell all my friends, like, verbally abuse them, in fact, when I say things like, this is useless, you're so good at this, but other people are good at this. Leave the other stuff to the other people. So, I don't know James well enough to call him up and yell at him, but I certainly, I'm going to try to impress that point to him, because it's the bottom line is he's amazing at making these carts, and he's very, very good at manufacturing and good customer service. But a lot of people could hire shops to manufacture them and then sell them. So hopefully I'll be able to get through to him, and he'll be able to outsource the stuff that other people are also good at and stick to designing some really killer ROM carts for all of us. Well, that's it for this week. To any newcomers, please leave any questions at all wherever you found this video. So the comments are always disabled on YouTube, unless I forget and then find out and disable it after the fact, but they're always supposed to be disabled on YouTube, because this is really about a supporter experience. I appreciate so much all the support that I get. None of the really amazing things I've been able to be a part of and get out to the public would have ever happened without all of your support. So this is really just a thank you and a small way that I can give back to all my amazing supporters. And then I just make them public. I have it automatically go live every Saturday, about a month after they air, just kind of as a courtesy, which, you know, still seems to piss a lot of people off, but whatever. This is about all of you, not about all of them. So, as always, thank you so much for participating. Any questions at all, wherever you found this video, leave the question. And just a quick reminder, if I don't get to your question, it's probably because you posted the question as I was recording this, so I wasn't able to get to it. So if I ever miss a question, just repeat it again in the next week's chat. I don't go back to the previous weeks. I just stick with the newer ones to make it easier. So sorry if I missed anybody. Feel free to repost if I haven't answered, and I'll see you all next week.